Welcome to the Library Love Fest podcast. I'm Virginia Stanley.
I'm Lainey Mays.
And Essie Ramirez.
We are the library marketing team at HarperCollins Publishers.
Join us every week as we present buzzworthy books through author interviews, conversations with editors, and expert opinions from librarians like you.
Enjoy the show.
Book Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Check it out. Do-do-do, Book Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Brought to you by Library Love Fest.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Library Love Fest podcast. This is Lainey. We have a great Editors Unedited episode for you today featuring editor Patrik Bass. Patrik is executive editor at Amistad, and he has a great episode for us, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
I'm Patrik Henry Bass, executive editor at Amistad, and I'm thrilled today to introduce Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa to Editors Unedited. Dahlma was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York City. As a child, she was sent to live with her grandparents in the South Bronx, where she was introduced to the culture of rural Puerto Rico, including the storytelling that came naturally to the women, especially the older women in her family. Much of her work is based on her experiences during this time. Dahlma taught creative writing, language, and literature in the New York City school system before becoming a young adult librarian. Her first novel, Daughters of the Stone, was listed as a 2010 finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. A Woman of Endurance, her second novel, will be published by Amistad on April 12th. Welcome, Dahlma, to Editors Unedited.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
I remember distinctly the first time I read an early draft of A Woman of Endurance, and I felt, as an editor, every emotion possible, from deep sorrow to unbridled joy. Tell us about the journey to creating this unforgettable novel.
Oh my goodness. I suppose the journey started when I was a little girl sent to stay with my grandmother while my parents saved up money to buy a home because our neighborhood in the South Bronx was becoming dangerous, and they wanted to keep us out of the way until they could provide a more stable home environment. And so they sent us to Puerto Rico to stay with my grandmother. And there I was introduced to the storytelling that went on her porch, with the ladies sitting in their rocking chairs telling stories. And of course, being a child, I was expected to just be silent and just listen. And that's exactly what I did. And I think that's when I started developing my skills as a storyteller, what to tell, what to keep from saying, what to exaggerate, what to omit. And so that started me as a storyteller. And then as a young woman, I realized that all the images of Puerto Ricans in the media were incomplete. There was no one who looked like me. There were no Black Puerto Ricans, and there were no working class Puerto Ricans in those media images. We were either gangsters or oversexed women or submissive unfortunates. And so I felt it was time to bring the reality of my life and the history of Afro descendants in particular onto the page. And that's where this story came from. The characters were introduced in the previous novel, Daughters of the Stone, and now I chose to take one of those characters and give her a full life. So that's where Pola and her story comes from.
Well, we're certainly glad that you did. So there were many, many characters in Daughters of the Stone that could have their own novel and their fuller story explored. Why was it critical that Pola was the central figure and a woman of endurance?
Well, Pola is an African woman who was purchased as a breeder, that is to create more enslaved people for the auction block. And her children were taken away immediately and sold. And this is a story that existed in Virginia, in the United States, with their slave farms, and in Aruba. And I started looking for that story in Puerto Rico, but I found that there wasn't a lot of historical information about it. And yet I could see it peeking through in what was not said. So that, for instance, in one plantation, I found information that showed that they went from being a sugarcane plantation with primarily male enslaved labor to primarily female enslaved labor. And there was no discussion or information about what were these women doing. There were female enslaved people who did work the fields, but primarily sugarcane cutting was a male environment. So why were all these women there? What happened to the men? And what exactly was the plantation selling? And that started me, those two images started me thinking about this particular narrative.
Right. The research in the novel is exhaustive, but not exhausting. In fact, it's quite impressive. Describe your process for research and how long did it take you to bring all the elements together for the novel that we'll have in our hands on April 12th?
It took about 4 years. The research was multifaceted. There was the traditional research of going into archives, library texts, sales receipts from plantations, and historical data. Then I did a lot of interviewing of the oldest people that I could find on the island. One led me to another, as many Latin American cultures are. Word of mouth is much more important than what Westerners would consider traditional sources. And we went all over the island visiting restored and other plantations that were in their natural state. So I did a lot of visiting, a lot of personal inquiry. I spoke to scholars at the university, architects, urban archaeologists, and I did a lot of going through woods and finding the footprint of slavery and plantation society that were still on the island, but not easily accessible.
It's quite a feat. So this podcast is going out and being listened to. Your tribe, which are librarians, who I think are, I don't know what we would do without librarians. They certainly have had a major impact on my life. So what skills were you able to use both for Daughters of the Stone and in A Woman of Endurance that you learned from your years as a librarian?
Well, first, shout out to all librarians. I am so proud to still consider myself a librarian, although I'm not active. But the skills that I transferred were the skills of organization, of cataloging important information as opposed to information that was not necessary for my particular task, and talking to librarians both here in New York City and in Puerto Rico to get beyond the card catalog, beyond the databases, and getting into stacks and getting access to rare books and rare materials. So all of those things were extremely important.
So the early response to A Woman of Endurance from both the literary community, I mean, I don't want to call out any endorsement without having another endorsement, but the support that you've received from Afro Latinx authors, mainstream authors, literary authors has just been overwhelming in the best possible way. And the early reviews have been really, really extraordinary. What do you want readers to take away from A Woman of Endurance?
That's an excellent question. I think what I want is to tell the story not told. Many people said to me, I didn't know there was slaves in Puerto Rico. And this lack of information, I won't call it ignorance because that has a negative connotation, but this lack of information needed to be filled. And so I wanted to show the plantation experience through the eyes of Black women who were enslaved. There are the white power structure within the novel is really tangential to the lives of the Black people. There was a full Black community that included different classes, different religions, different occupations, different skills that really are not focused on. That usually in your traditional slave narratives, the slaves are one monolithic group of people and they're given whatever characterization what they chose. I wanted to make them individual people with individual motivation. So there are mentors and there are helpers and there are collaborators. There are people who internalize the racism of the society, and there were people who safeguarded the cultures that they came from. So African religion, traditional African religion, or better said, traditional Yoruba religion, is an integral part of the narrative of both novels. And in this case, the traditions that sustained the enslaved people, whether it be music or dance or food or modes of teaching, those are all kept intact and help people endure and survive a really brutal system. But I want the readers to know that this isn't a novel of woe is me and they done us wrong. This is a novel of strength and healing and love and disappointment and the whole spectrum of humanity, which is not often projected in some of the literature.
Well, it's a masterpiece. I'm so thrilled that readers will have an opportunity again on April 12th. And there will also be a Spanish edition from Harper Espanol. I believe May 12th is the date, but all the information is on Dahlma's website. Dahlma, can you share your website information?
Okay, my website is www.dahlmallanos-figueroa.com. And that is my whole name without spaces. And I hope that everyone goes there to find not only information about me and about my process, but about the books and a further extension of why I feel it was important to put this particular narrative on people in English and then in Spanish.
Well, Dahlma, you and I will be talking a lot more,
Absolutely.
Which is always a pleasure and a delight. Thank you so much for joining us for Editors Unedited. I hope you all will enjoy A Woman of Endurance. And thank you for your time, Dahlma.
Absolutely. And may everyone have a wonderful day and hopefully a wonderful spring to come around the corner.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Library Love Fest podcast. For more information on this week's episode, go to librarylovefest.com. Enjoying the show? We would love to hear what you think. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Library Love Fest and on Instagram at Harper Library. Be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcast and share the show with a friend. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, we bet you'll enjoy all of the other podcasts from HarperCollins publishers. Find a list of shows at harpercollins.com/podcast. See you next week.